Welcome back to Sleepy Saga Histories, where quiet stories from long ago are told by firelight to help you drift away. Tonight, you'll journey through a forgotten moment in time, a soft thread in the fabric of ancient life, slow and unhurried. Let the day fall away, your breath slow, and if this story keeps you company, you're always welcome back to the fire. In the quiet hum of antiquity, long before modern plumbing or soap dispensers, the ancient Romans developed a world of hygiene that was, by their standards, remarkably sophisticated. Yet by ours it was peculiar, rudimentary, and at times unsettling. To understand Roman hygiene is to slip slowly and deliberately into a world where baths were public, cleanliness was a matter of civic pride, and the preferred tool for wiping oneself was a communal sponge on a stick. It is a story of marble and mud, of scented oils and shared sweat. Roman hygiene was at once advanced and archaic, functional and flamboyant, and always deeply Roman. Let us begin, not with the grand aqueducts or echoing bathhouses, but with the concept of cleanliness itself. The Romans did not define hygiene in quite the same way we do. Cleanliness was not only a personal virtue, it was a reflection of discipline, of control over the body, and ultimately a mark of Romanitas, the quality of being Roman. For the Romans, bathing was not merely about removing dirt. It was a ritual, a habit, and for many, a daily expectation. Yet soap was virtually unknown. Instead they employed olive oil, sometimes mixed with ash or sand, applied generously to the skin. This oil would bind to the sweat and grime of the day. A servant or the bather himself would then use a strigil, a curved metal scraper, to remove both oil and dirt, leaving the skin smooth and lightly scented. There was, quite literally, a scraping away of the day. Public baths or thermae were essential to Roman hygiene. These were not mere pools but complexes, often vast, with separate rooms for different temperatures. The frigidarium, cold, the tepidarium, warm, and the caldarium, hot. Bathing was typically done in the afternoon, after work or exercise. The sequence was deliberate, from sweating in hot steam rooms to plunging into cold water. And though these baths were public and could be crowded, they were also a space of social levelling. Senators and freedmen, merchants and soldiers, all could share the same water, warmed by the same furnace beneath the floor. The hypocauste system, which heated these baths, was an engineering marvel. Hot air was circulated beneath raised floors, and behind the walls, warming the rooms above. Fires fed by slaves in the furnace rooms kept the system running. And although modern minds might balk at the cleanliness of such shared spaces, to the Romans they were havens of order, routine, and civility. We must pause here and consider the tools of bathing. Towels were rare and precious. Most bathers simply air-dried or wrapped themselves in linen. The strigil, sometimes made of bronze, was curved and elegant. Many examples survive today in museums, worn smooth by years of scraping. There were also alabastrons, small flasks of perfume or oil, which might be worn on a thong around the neck. The scents varied myrrh, rosemary, lavender, and were prized not just for their fragrance, but for their ability to mask other odours. Despite these routines, body odour was common. After all, Romans wore layers of wool and linen in the Mediterranean heat, and deodorants, as we know them, did not exist. Instead, perfumed oils and powders helped mask unpleasant smells. Wealthier citizens might even dust themselves with crushed rose petals or cinnamon bark. Others, less fortunate, simply lived with the smells of life in an ancient city. Manure, smoke, sweat and wine. Toilets, too, were communal. Rows of marble seats, sometimes elaborately carved, lined the public latrines. Beneath them, channels of flowing water carried waste away. But there was no toilet paper. Instead, a tersorium, a sponge affixed to a stick, was used, dipped in water or vinegar between uses and often shared. This, perhaps more than any other element, gives pause to the modern mind. Yet for the Romans, it was entirely ordinary. The tersorium was practical, reusable, and deeply Roman. Waste management was in fact a serious business. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, carried waste from homes, baths and streets into the Tiber River. Though not entirely hygienic by modern standards, it prevented much of the city from becoming unlivable. And yet, the air of Rome still carried the weight of its underpinnings. Aromas from animal stalls, tannery pits, and fish markets all mingled in the sun. Street cleaners, or scopari, swept the roads. Laws were passed against tossing garbage into the streets, though compliance was uneven. In poorer districts, waste often piled high. Chamber pots were emptied from upper windows, prompting the need for umbrellas, or at least hats when walking through certain alleyways. But the wealthy had private latrines, sometimes located off the kitchen or tucked behind the triclinium. These rooms were tiled and flushed with buckets or small pipes. Wealthy women might scent the room with herbs or burn incense to mask odours. Hair removal was another aspect of Roman hygiene. Both men and women removed body hair using tweezers, pumice stones, or depilatory pastes made from resins and vinegar. Smooth skin was associated with youth, vitality, and refinement. Barbers or tonsors provided shaves, haircuts, and even minor surgeries, often in open stalls along busy streets. Fingernails were trimmed with small knives or bronze clippers. Teeth were cleaned with powders made from crushed bones, oyster shells, or charcoal. Some Romans used sticks or frayed twigs as toothbrushes. Toothpaste recipes varied but might include honey, vinegar, and ash. Earwax was removed with ear scoops, often made of bronze or silver, shaped like tiny spoons. These were carried on grooming kits known as toiletry chains, which also included tweezers, nail cleaners, and other small tools. Let us now drift from the bustle of the city and its public baths into the more intimate realm of the Roman home. While Rome's grand thermae were available to all freemen for a modest fee, or sometimes free under imperial sponsorship, many households had their own routines, shaped by wealth, space, and social standing. The wealthiest homes, the domus of senators, patricians, and merchant elites, often featured private bathing rooms. These were sometimes modest copies of the public sequence. A small hot pool heated by braziers, a tepid wash area, and a cold plunge basin tiled in geometric mosaics. The bath might be tucked behind the peristyle garden, shaded by vines, the air scented by laurel and rosemary shrubs, light filtered through slatted wooden shutters, dancing across polished marble basins. A slave, usually young, quiet and trained, would bring warmed oil in a delicate clay vessel and apply it slowly to the skin of his master or mistress, beginning at the shoulders, working downward in silence. Water was drawn by hand from cisterns or brought by lead piping from aqueduct-fed city mains. Romans were proud of their water engineering, and indeed the aqueducts are among their most enduring achievements. These towering stone channels, some more than 50 miles long, carried water from distant springs to the heart of the empire. Once in the city, it was distributed through a complex system of pipes, fountains, and public basins. But access was not equal. The poor fetched water from street fountains or public baths, often sharing with hundreds of others. The rich, however, might pay for private connections, allowing for indoor basins, decorative fountains, and sometimes even trickling wall features in their gardens. Cleanliness in the home was a delicate dance between effort and ritual. Floors were swept daily with bundled reeds or palm brushes. Pumice and vinegar were used to scrub stains from marble. The air might be freshened with burning kifi and imported Egyptian incense, or local herbs like thyme and bay. In some homes, bowls of fresh flowers stood near the doorway, not only to greet the senses, but to mask the ever-present dust and urban odour that clung even to wealth. Linen was laundered, not with soap but with urine. Yes, it is true. Roman fullers, the ancient launderers, used ammonia-rich urine to cleanse cloth, collected from public urinals or chamber pots. Clothing was soaked, trodden underfoot in vats, rinsed, and then hung to dry under the Mediterranean sun. The practice, while shocking to modern sensibilities, was effective. The smell, however, lingered faintly on even the cleanest tunics. Evening grooming was a quiet affair. A matron might sit in her bedroom, her cubiculum surrounded by servants, holding small mirrors made of polished bronze. Her hair would be combed and pinned into intricate styles, braided towers, coils bound with ribbon, or simple knots for older women. Scents were applied sparingly. Rose oil behind the ears, myrtle upon the wrists, a dab of cinnamon at the neck. Cosmetics were used, though not excessively. Chalk for the skin, crushed carmine beetle for the lips, soot for the brows. And yet, these substances were often applied with such subtlety that they seemed to disappear beneath lamplight. Nails were kept short. Slaves were often tasked with smoothing them, using pumice or rubbing them with oil to give them a soft sheen. Toenails, too, were cared for, especially in a society where sandals left feet exposed. The Roman appreciation for grooming extended from head to toe, a complete and considered process. Children were bathed by their mothers or nurses, using small basins filled from pots warmed by the hearth. Boys were often shorn closely to the scalp for cleanliness, while girls' hair was braided and tied with bits of wool or ribbon. From a young age they were taught to scrape their skin after play, to avoid lice and rashes, and to wash their hands before meals. Yet lice were a constant companion. Despite best efforts, these tiny pests thrived in the warm climate and among the close quarters of urban living. Combs carved from bone or ivory, fine-toothed and elegant, were used daily to catch them. Some Romans applied oils mixed with herbs in hopes of repelling the creatures. Others simply endured them. And what of dental hygiene? It was basic, but not entirely absent. Romans prized white teeth, and poets of the time occasionally mocked those with foul breath or stained mouths. To keep their smiles presentable, some used powders made from crushed charcoal, oyster shell, or even deer antler. These would be rubbed onto the teeth using fingers or small cloths. Mouthwash might be made from vinegar, salt, or even, unfortunately, urine, which was believed to whiten teeth. While this is supported by ammonia's bleaching properties, it must have left a lasting impression in more ways than one. Notably, toothaches were common. Toothpicks made from bone or wood were carried in small pouches. When pain grew unbearable, extraction was the only real remedy, performed by barbers or even self-administered. There are accounts, though rare, of rudimentary dental prosthetics, golden wires holding replacement teeth in place, but these were rare, expensive, and painful to install. As night fell, Romans prepared for rest with a final cleansing. The face was wiped with linen dampened in rosewater. Feet, dusty from walking Rome's roads, were washed in shallow basins. The soles were rubbed with oil to prevent cracking. In wealthier homes, this task was performed by slaves, kneeling with small flasks and cloths, their movements slow and silent. Sleepwear was minimal. Many simply draped a clean tunic over their shoulders or lay beneath a thin woolen blanket. Bedding varied, from simple straw mats to feather-stuffed mattresses atop carved wooden frames. Sheets were rare. Most Romans slept directly on woven covers or animal hides. Even the act of going to bed carried hygienic meaning. To sleep clean was to sleep well. Dirt, sweat, and the noise of the street were left behind with each ritual scrape, wash, and oiling. Lamps were dimmed, prayers were whispered, and the city, in all its smells and noise, settled into its nocturnal rhythm. Let us now wander into the most peculiar and perhaps most discussed realm of Roman hygiene, the toilet. A curious thing, these Roman latrines, public and open as they were, may at first seem crude to modern eyes, yet they represented a remarkable fusion of practicality, engineering, and social custom. In the heart of cities like Rome or Ostia, one might stumble upon a forica, a communal public toilet, tucked into the shadow of a bathhouse, or along the edge of a forum. Inside, long stone benches ran the length of the walls, each carved with evenly spaced circular openings. Beneath these benches ran a small stream of water, quietly flowing to carry away waste. There were no partitions, no doors. Romans sat side by side, robes hitched carefully, exchanging conversation as casually as one might over bread and wine. A gutter often ran in front of the feet too, trickling fresh water. This was not for drinking, but for cleaning a tersorium, a sponge affixed to a wooden stick. After relieving oneself, a Roman would dip the sponge in the stream, rinse it, and reuse it. The tersorium, stored communally, was practical, economical, and deeply Roman in its shared usage. Some were soaked in vinegar between uses, but by modern standards, the practice remains strikingly unsanitary. Private homes of the wealthy sometimes had latrines as well. Small marble seats tucked into corners near the kitchen or beside the garden wall. These were connected to the same sewage channels that served the public baths, ensuring that waste was carried away and never left stagnant. In rural villas, however, simpler chamber pots were the norm, emptied into compost pits or middens, far from the living quarters. Beneath the city ran the Cloaca Maxima, one of Rome's greatest feats of engineering. This massive sewer system, begun in the 6th century BCE, channeled runoff, bathwater and latrine waste through brick-lined tunnels out to the Tiber River. The scent was ever present near its grates, but the system kept the city's heart beating clean, or at least cleaner than it might have been without it. And yet, the streets of Rome were not always pristine. Despite these grand works of sanitation, waste often found its way underfoot. Vendors tossed scraps into gutters, urchins spilled chamber pots from balconies. Even the Romans complained. Laws were enacted prohibiting the emptying of slop from upper-story windows without warning cries, "Cave!" to alert those passing below. Still, one walked carefully in the city. For personal hygiene, the Roman day began early. Even before the bathhouses opened, one might cleanse the face with cool water from a household basin. Women often applied a light veil of powder to absorb oil. Men might anoint their beards with scented salves. olive oil remained the universal base, infused with herbs such as basil, rosemary, or lavender. These oils not only scented the body, but softened the skin, protected from sun, and, Romans believed, kept away disease. Perfume was worn by both sexes, though opinions on it varied. Some philosophers, like Seneca, scorned excessive use of fragrance as indulgent. Others embraced it as a marker of civilization. Imported scents from Arabia, Egypt, and India were expensive, stored in small blown glass bottles or carved alabaster jars. The very wealthy might have servants whose sole task was to prepare oils and apply them precisely at different hours of the day. Ear hygiene too received attention. Small bronze tools, ear scoops, were carried on rings or tucked into grooming kits. These were used carefully to remove wax, along with tiny tweezers for plucking stray hairs. Similar kits also held nail scrapers and toothpicks, demonstrating how personal grooming was a portable, ongoing habit. Inscriptions and graffiti left by everyday Romans suggest a widespread concern with body odour and presentation. Complaints about halitosis, unwashed feet, or greasy skin appear frequently, often used to insult rivals or lovers who had spurned the writer's affection. In one preserved wall, carving from Pompeii, a man is mocked for smelling worse than a latrine. To be clean, it seems, was not merely pleasant, it was social currency. In the countryside, hygiene was more rustic. Farmers washed in streams, rubbed their skin with coarse sand or ash, and used wool or grass as makeshift cloths. The same principles applied: scrape, oil, rinse, but without the elegance of mosaics or hot water. Bathhouses existed in many provincial towns, but they were smaller, simpler, and less ornate. Still, the ritual remained. To be Roman was to be clean, or at least to try. Let us now consider the tools of Roman hygiene: simple, clever, and sometimes surprisingly elegant. The strigil, a curved metal instrument resembling a flattened hook, was the most iconic. After exercise or time spent in the warm rooms of the bathhouse, a Roman would coat their body in olive oil, then scrape the oil, sweat, and dirt away with the strigil's smooth edge. It was not a harsh action, but a practiced motion, sliding over the limbs and back with ease. Attendants often helped, especially in wealthier circles. The residue was collected in shallow basins and discarded, or in some cases used to feed fire or grease equipment. These strigils were made from bronze or iron, sometimes inlaid with silver, and they travelled in leather satchels alongside oil flasks and small towels. Many were passed down from father to son. Archaeologists have uncovered them throughout the empire, from the villas of Gaul to the fortresses of Britannia, always worn but cared for, a daily companion in cleanliness. Then there were the pilae, or small stones, and pumice, used to exfoliate the skin. Some bathers brought rough cloths, others used coarse sand. The goal was to polish the body, smooth imperfections, and stimulate circulation. A tingling skin was a clean skin, the Romans believed, and even children learned early how to scrub their arms and legs in circular motions. For the face, women sometimes applied milk masks, often made from goat's milk, mixed with honey or crushed barley. These soft pastes were left on overnight and rinsed away in the morning. Recipes varied by household, passed between mothers and daughters, or scribbled in margins of medical texts. Even men used light facial scrubs. Ground lupin beans were common, and they were said to brighten the skin after sun exposure. Dental care too had its place. Romans did not have toothbrushes in the modern sense, but they cleaned their teeth using chewing sticks, often from aromatic trees like mastic or juniper. These softened twigs were frayed at one end, creating a fibrous brush. Powders made from crushed bones, oyster shells, or charcoal were applied to the teeth. Some mixtures included baking soda and mint, while others, less successfully, used powdered mouse skulls or lizard ash, as prescribed by certain eccentric physicians. Mouthwashes were simple: vinegar, salt water, or wine rinses. Bad breath, or halitosis, was mocked in graffiti and satire, and considered a sign of poor self-care. Lucilius once quipped that a man's mouth smelled like a fishmonger's bucket. Such remarks were biting, for to neglect one's hygiene was to show disregard for the company of others. Hair care was equally ritualised. Most men wore their hair short and neat, trimmed with bronze or iron shears. Barbershops, tonsoria, were common and doubled as social clubs. Here men discussed politics, read poetry aloud, or shared gossip while having their beards trimmed or faces shaved with crescent-shaped razors. Women, by contrast, took great care with their hairstyles, often curling, braiding, or twisting their locks into elaborate shapes. They used combs of bone or wood, pins made of ivory, and perfumes to scent their hair. Wigs were popular too, often imported from India or North Africa, and some women kept multiple styles for different occasions. Body hair was frequently removed. Upper-class Roman women plucked their eyebrows and used pumice stones, or resin waxes on their arms and legs. Men might do the same, particularly those in the baths or athletic arenas, where a smooth physique was admired. Inscriptions even mention slaves who specialised in hair removal, known as a liptai, and their work was considered both necessary and appreciated, though perhaps not always pleasant. Inside homes, the tools of hygiene were displayed with quiet pride. Small shelves in the atrium or cubiculum might hold glass bottles of oil, pots of rouge, or silver-handled combs. A visitor might notice towels hung to dry near a sunlit window, or water jugs standing by the hearth. In wealthier households, these items were handled by personal attendants or slaves trained in grooming. But even in modest homes, hygiene mattered. It was not merely about cleanliness, it was about appearance, order, and self-respect. A Roman took care to be presentable before the gods, before the family, and before society. As we drift further into this quiet world, we find that even the smallest items, a rough cloth, a gentle comb, a scoop of oil, were woven into daily life with purpose. Each act of washing or grooming was a reminder of one's place in the world, and of the Roman belief that to care for the body was to honour the spirit within. Now we must walk slowly into one of the most curious and often misunderstood corners of Roman hygiene, the latrines. In the humblest homes, relieving oneself meant stepping outside, sometimes to a shared chamber pot, sometimes to the edge of a gutter that ran through the street. But in wealthier villas, and especially in public facilities, there existed an entirely different experience, one that blended utility, ritual, and social interaction in ways that modern eyes may find surprising. Public latrines, known as forike, were often built near or even within the thermae, the public bath complexes. They were long covered rooms, typically made of stone, open to air or shaded by tiled roofs, with smooth stone benches lining the walls. In these benches were evenly spaced holes, polished by use, spaced side by side without partitions. Beneath ran a continuous stream of water to carry away waste, sometimes channeled from aqueducts or bathhouse runoff. Privacy, as we think of it, was not the Roman way. In these communal spaces, Romans would talk, joke, or even debate as they sat. Graffiti found in latrines includes poems, jokes, and political commentary, scratched into stone by idle hands. One scholar likened it to a public forum for the bowels, a place not only to relieve the body, but to engage the mind. As for toilet hygiene, the Romans did not use toilet paper. Instead, they employed a tool called the tersorium, a sponge attached to a wooden stick. After use, it was rinsed in a basin or channel of running water, often perfumed with vinegar or salt to cleanse and disinfect. The tersorium was shared, reused, and stored in communal jars or stone containers built into the latrine wall. For the average Roman, this practice was not repulsive, but practical, rooted in the rhythms of public life. Some wealthier citizens may have had their own private sponge or personal cloth. In country villas, soft moss, leaves, or even bits of wool were sometimes used. Pliny the Elder, ever curious, noted that fig leaves were particularly gentle and effective. But Roman engineers thought beyond the act itself. They worked to integrate sanitation into urban planning. Beneath the bustling streets of Rome lay the Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewage systems. This vast network of tunnels and channels funneled waste and stormwater into the Tiber River. Though not as hygienic by modern standards, pollution of water sources remained common. It was an ambitious feat of civil engineering that inspired future civilizations. In homes equipped with latrino, small toilets were tucked beside the kitchen or near the garden. These private facilities also use flowing water where possible, fed by small lead pipes. They were rarely grand, but they represented a step toward personal comfort, showing that even in private, Romans valued cleanliness and order. Odour was a constant concern. The Romans used incense, scented oils, and burning herbs like bay leaf or myrrh to mask smells. Public latrines often had perfumed burners or pots of aromatic resins left in the corners. Inscriptions warned against lingering too long or mistreating the facilities, and some even offered humorous rhymes to pass the time. There was also a religious aspect. Stercutius, a minor Roman deity, was invoked as the god of manure and fertilizer. More broadly, household spirits known as lares were believed to watch over domestic functions including cleanliness. Offerings of oil or wine were sometimes made near wells and lavatories, especially during festivals like Perilia, which celebrated purification and agricultural renewal. For all their engineering, the Romans did not yet understand germs. Disease often travelled through contaminated water or shared utensils, especially in poorer quarters. Epidemics flared in the crowded insulae, tenement buildings of Rome, where hygiene broke down under the pressure of population. Still, even there, efforts were made. Water was fetched daily, floors swept, pots scrubbed with ash or sand. Roman doctors, or medici, wrote extensively on the value of hygiene. Galen advised his patients to bathe regularly, evacuate at consistent times, and clean their tools thoroughly. He believed that health was maintained through balance of diet, exercise, and cleanliness. Bathing, grooming, and relieving oneself were all part of the body's natural regulation, essential for harmony of the humours. And so we see hygiene in Rome not as a side note, but as a woven part of life. The latrine was not shameful, but shared. The bath was not luxury, but routine. The sponge, the oil, the flowing water, all of it spoke to a civilization, trying, within its means and knowledge, to rise above the grime of the world and step each morning into a cleaner day. In the quiet hush of early morning, before the sun had reached its zenith, Roman city streets began to stir, and as they did, another aspect of hygiene came into focus, not just personal, but public. Roman cities, particularly large ones like Rome, Pompeii and Ostia, were engineered to keep people and places clean, or at least cleaner than chaos would allow. The streets were paved with large stone slabs, elevated sidewalks flanked either side, and deep gutters ran along the edges to collect wastewater. Rainfall, bathhouse runoff, and household refuse all found their way into these channels, guided steadily by gravity. Every morning, teams of public slaves or hired workers would make their rounds, sweeping debris, scooping waste, and washing down alleys with buckets. Their work was not glamorous, but it was essential. These individuals, largely anonymous to history, formed the undercurrent of urban hygiene. Without them, the city's polished marble and orderly grid would quickly descend into disorder. The aqueducts, those graceful stone arches cut in across the countryside, played a crucial role here. Not only did they supply fresh water for baths, fountains and homes, they also flushed the sewers. Rome alone had 11 aqueducts at its height, delivering hundreds of millions of gallons of water daily. Some of this water was diverted for drinking and cooking, but much of it was routed through castella, or distribution tanks, where it was allocated for public use. From the castella, water flowed to public fountains, where citizens filled their amphorae and jugs. It streamed through public latrines, rinsed the floors of bakeries, and trickled into animal troughs. Water was life, but it was also cleanliness, threading invisibly through every layer of Roman life. Meanwhile, inside Roman homes, cleanliness was attended to with quiet care. Floors were swept daily with brooms of bound twigs. Terracotta tiles were wiped with wet cloths, and mosaics polished with scraps of wool. Ash and vinegar served as natural scouring agents. Kitchen utensils were scrubbed after use, even if only with sand and water. And chamber pots, discreetly placed under beds or in corners, were emptied into nearby sewers or cesspits, often by the latrina slave, a role rarely celebrated, but dutifully performed. The wealthy had more elaborate routines. In a domus, the family slaves ensured that wash basins were full, linens were aired, and towels were warmed by the hearth. Scented water was sometimes sprinkled on floors, especially before guests arrived. Incense burned in small braziers, perfuming the air with cinnamon, myrrh, or laurel. This wasn't just for luxury, it was believed to purify the space, chasing away foul odours and perhaps unseen illnesses. In temples and sacred spaces, ritual cleanliness took on a deeper, spiritual tone. Worshippers would wash their hands and faces before approaching the altar, and priests followed strict ablution rituals. The Vestal Virgins, guardians of Rome's sacred hearth, bathed several times a day and changed their robes with ceremonial precision. Cleanliness here was symbolic, an outward sign of inward purity. Even death required washing. When a Roman died, the body was gently bathed by family or hired undertakers. Oils were rubbed into the skin, limbs straightened, hair combed. The process was not rushed. It was an act of care and respect, and even those of modest means tried to honour it. Inscriptions on tombs often praised the deceased for being purer or clean, of body, of home, of reputation. And what of the rural poor, far from aqueducts and marble bathhouses? Hygiene in the countryside was simpler, but no less meaningful. People bathed in rivers or rainwater cisterns, washed clothes on stones, and used leaves, straw, or scraps for cleansing. Communal wells provided fresh water, and homes had designated areas for washing hands and feet after work. It was not opulent, but it was intentional. Even farmers returning from muddy fields knew the comfort of rinsing their arms in a cool basin. The Romans, in their way, were deeply aware of the connection between cleanliness and order, health and routine, the body and the world it moved through. They lacked our scientific knowledge, yes, but they were observant. They watched how skin reacted to different oils, how certain herbs soothed rashes, how city filth bred discomfort and disease. Their practices, built over centuries, reflected generations of trial habit and inherited wisdom. And in the final stretch of evening, when the lamps were lit and silence fell over the atrium, one might hear the quiet rustle of water being poured into a basin, over hands, across tired feet. The day ended as it began, with the body being tended to, restored, readied for sleep. Let us step back now, not just from the baths and the basins, the combs and oils, but from the Roman world itself, and look with stillness at what we've seen. We have wandered the tiled corridors of the great thermae, where warm steam once wrapped around tired limbs, and echoes bounced from vaulted stone. We have glimpsed the tools of cleansing, the strigils, the pumice, the sponges, ordinary objects elevated by daily ritual. We've peeked into communal latrines, where dignity and discomfort sat side by side, and into aqueduct-fed kitchens where water, even if cold and sparse, was used with care. Through this, the Romans showed us something quietly enduring, that hygiene is a kind of language, a way of speaking to the world, to others, and to oneself. Clean hands after labour, combed hair before stepping into the forum, the gentle scrape of olive oil drawn from skin at the bath. These gestures, small, repeated, sometimes unnoticed, said, I live among others, I care for my body, I prepare myself for the day. It is easy, from the comforts of a modern home, to smile at the idea of shared sponges or public toilets. But to do so is to miss the quiet genius of what the Romans achieved. They built not just sewers and baths, but systems of rhythm and routine, of expectations and etiquette. Their efforts to manage dirt, disease, and disorder helped define what it meant to live in a city, what it meant to be civilized. And though the centuries have passed, though their world crumbled and ours rose in its place, that core remains. The soap at the sink, the water running at our command, the towel draped neatly after use. These are their legacy. These too are Roman. Their mistakes were many: lead pipes, polluted rivers, overlooked infection, but their efforts were unceasing. From emperors to slaves, hygiene mattered, cleanliness mattered. Not always perfectly, not always pleasantly, but consistently and sincerely. So now, as the last oil lamp flickers and the bathhouse echoes grow still, let your thoughts drift, like the steam that once curled above Roman marble. Let the world of terracotta tubs and stone-strung aqueducts fade gently to shadow. You have walked the streets of ancient Rome, not as a conqueror, but as an observer of its quietest victories. And now, as every Roman day once did, this one draws to a close, not with grandeur, but with ritual. A final rinse, a folded cloth, a pause. Good night, traveller of time. Sleep well beneath the stars that once shone over Rome.